Although all the speeches I assign my students are really my favorite, and I hope that they become favorites for all the students, I suppose the persuasive speech is what you'd call the queen of the speech arts, isn't it? It's sort of what we aspire to as public speaking instructors. We want students to be able to convince an audience that something is the case. We want our students to be able to persuade their audience to do something or to change their mind about something. Here at Clover Park, the kind of public speaking persuasive speech that I have the students learn to do is very career oriented, and I'm going to tell you about that one in this guide first. What I'd like to do is explain exactly what it is, tell you what I hope the students will learn from it, and also probably what I would do if I had more time for the speech in our curriculum. So, what do I do in the persuasive speech? This is a two-part speech. In fact, the second part isn't really a speech at all, but it is an authentic communication event that involves many students rather than just one at a time. I ask the students to prepare a 3 to 5 minute speech on the topic of why you should hire me. This means that they have to consider for themselves what do they want to be hired as. Because we're a technical college, this isn't too hard for most of the students. At least they have a general idea of the career field that they're interested in, unless they're just taking our class as a prerequisite for some later study. But even in that case, they usually have an idea of what they aspire to. So the 3 to 5 minutes are meant to give them time to list some points that should persuade a prospective employer to hire them. After each student in a row has done this without any discussion, keeping in mind that usually we do have time to debrief each student after his or her speech throughout the course, but for this speech we don't. After the students have each given their 3 to 5 minute presentations, we configure the classroom so that those 3 or 4 or 5 students sit on one side of a table from an equal number of students or a comparable number of students who've been writing rubrics with respect to their speeches. Then the students who've been writing rubrics draw pennies out of a cup which holds 50 such pennies, each of which has a number on it, which corresponds to a question on a list of 50 questions having to do with job interviews. In other words, those people who have just had a chance to speak for 3 to 5 minutes about themselves individually will now be grilled by their fellow students consecutively with questions that are meant to be authentic. The remainder of the class, each time this happens, is spent with those questions. So each day, most of the students will have at least one question asked to them unless the schedule just doesn't permit it. For the first day or so, I want all the students who are giving speeches and being interviewed to answer one question at the beginning that's the same as everybody else's, and to answer one question at the end that's the same as everybody else's. The first question is, tell me about yourself. The second one is there anything else about you that I should know? This is how the logistics work. What I hope that the students learn from this, obviously, is what it takes to be persuasive, what it takes to make sure that people understand the most important things about yourself when you're trying to find a job, and to make sure that the students understand some of the best ways to answer questions in a job interview. I didn't mention before, but I should say that in the job interview portion of this speech, the people who ask the questions are not to repeat the questions. Also, after the students give their answers, one at a time, I will ask the students what they feel the interviewee did well in his or her answer, and also what would have made it a better answer. In this speech, I'm quite a bit more direct and perhaps I should say blunt in my comments in assessing the students in the interview, because that portion of this experience is not graded. That's one reason why I'm more blunt. The other is that, of course, this speech is meant to be a practical, authentic kind of preparation for the real world, in which interviewers are not necessarily very sympathetic and understanding and accommodating if somebody messes up. So that's the way that things run. I believe that history has shown over the past 8 years that students do tend to learn how to put together a creditable list of reasons why they should be hired. If they don't have a good idea of what they will know when they complete their programs of study here prior to this speech, they really have to figure those things out by talking to instructors or talking to other students in the program so that they can present themselves as if they're graduates. Now, this is how it works. I'd like to comment just a little bit on what I'd love to be able to do if there were more time in our class. You in your course may decide that you want this persuasive speech to be a significant part of your curriculum. Or perhaps you're going to teach another class in which job search and job interview skills and the like will be a large component of the course. In any case, what I'd love to do, and what I occasionally get to do, is talk prior to the actual preparation for the speech about what's the point of a job search. What are the avenues students can try to go down in order to get jobs? I usually have time to tell them, for what it's worth, that from my perspective, the best job interview is the one that students don't have. The best resume for a student is one that they don't have to write. And the best cover letter for a student is one that they don't have to mail or put online. In other words, the best way to find a job, if you can, is to simply have someone come to you and offer it to you. Failing that, there are many other ways that I tell the students that they ought to consider getting a job beyond the simple process of having an interview. In fact, if you don't do these other things well, you probably won't have an interview. I also would like to counsel them about some of the ins and outs of HR and some of the realities about seeking jobs. I also like to counsel them about why are you particularly interested in a special career of your choosing? Why have you chosen this career? Are you really sure it's going to provide you with the fulfillment you want in your lives? So these are some things I'd like to do. Also, if it were up to me, if we had time, we'd probably spend 2 weeks on this project rather than just 5 days of speeches. However, because of the way that I've configured this class with the 7 speeches, it's really not possible for us to do that. Every time I think I could expand one of the speeches, I realize that I don't want to subtract from any of the others. So if you're like me, you may find that you may not even be able to do this speech, particularly if you're going to do a persuasive speech along the lines of the Monroe motivated sequence, or a more traditional kind of persuasive speech that involves social issues, political issues, religious issues, personal decision making, and things of that nature. In any case, this has been an overview of what I use for the persuasive speech. Occasionally I also talk to the students about Ethos, Logos, and Pathos. Occasionally in the past I've even had situations in which students would give a speech sort of in practice format, and I would ask the other students to raise their hands when they heard an example of Ethos, and they raise their hands when they heard an example of Logos, raise their hands when they heard an example of Pathos. But that isn't always possible again. I hope this has been a reasonable way of presenting what happens in our Why You Should Hire Me speech. I will talk later about other kinds of persuasive speeches, although in my class, since I don't use those other components, I'll probably be putting into the course guide simply references to the fantastic work that Ellen Bremen has done at Highline Community College with respect to persuasive speaking.